So just a few minutes early here for our scheduled time to be talking about what the one thing school leaders can be doing right now to improve their school reputation. But before we get into the topic and just give people an opportunity to join in on this conversation, what are some of the things you're hearing, Stephen, from schools that they're worried about or that really resonate around this topic of reputation management?
I think there's a couple of things. I think the first thing I'm hearing and seeing in my work with schools is that where to start first. I think there's a sense that schools need to probably approach their planning and their thinking in a more systematic way. So I've got a number of school clients where they're sort of working to, I'd say, a 100-day plan, which is essentially getting to the necessities of what we must do and sticking to the hymn sheets, so to speak, and really ensuring that what's most important is getting done, but that's getting done in a coordinated way. And I think, also providing a bit of I guess, a trust and confidence builder within their community. So I'm seeing that as a bit of a theme in schools at the moment. And, it's head down, tail up in that sense, where schools are really trying to deal with the big issues, getting the staff in and so forth. Probably the second thing I'm seeing is that schools are now confronted with enrolment challenges. And that's a pretty universal picture, some more than others, but those that haven't got an enrolment challenge may well have one coming, and they may well have a retention issue. So I'm hearing about a sort of renewed focus on the area of enrolment and retention. And I guess that, brings us very close to the concept of reputation. And certainly many schools around the world are confronted with a set of conditions which really are a perfect storm. So this, I guess, really means for school communities, this includes the boards of schools, that they've really got to work in almost a crisis situation, but they've got to work towards a long-term outcome, not just a short-term crisis situation. And in some cases, really redefining and refocusing and redirecting the school in a really significant way.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, it's not funny, but when I reflect on this topic, the one thing that kind of comes to my mind is that it's so closely tied to retention of students and admissions. But I mean, to be frank, when we think about reputation management, and when I think about the journey schools have been on, in particular international schools over the last, say, 5-10 years, some schools have been thriving and just ushering a lot of different families into their community, but not spending enough time educating them on the real value of joining that particular school. A lot of these people just come in with this, a lot of families kind of come in with this expectation that, they have high hopes in terms of what their child can achieve in that school or programs that school offers. But I don't think there's enough time taken to really educate and orient those families better to what makes that school special and unique. And, COVID, unfortunately, kind of laid bare the school's sort of lack of a narrative. So, for all of you joining us now here on Facebook Live, again, I'm joined by Dr. Stephen Holmes, and our topic today is, what is that one thing that school leaders can be doing to improve school reputation? But, maybe before we even talk about that one thing, maybe we should define what reputation is in this context.
But Michael, I think it's a really good first step for us to take, and it's a concept that, even though it's an everyday term that's used, very few people have really looked seriously at the concept and defining it. And as I say, in schools, we tend to see a situation where reputation becomes an issue in crisis times only. And I would say that there's probably two characteristics for us to all to think about with reputation management as opposed to reputation as a concept. And that is, firstly, that reputation management really requires us to take a hard look at the cumulative activity of the school. So what are we doing in the short term, but also the long term, that would shape and influence the opinion people have of the school? And so I think, as we all know, schools can sometimes jump from focus to focus depending on new leadership or change conditions or the latest fad. Reputation management requires and reminds us that people form a view about a school based on cumulative activity over time. And we all know it's very difficult to shift that in people's minds. So people do take an effort and an action to try and get a full picture on the school. Admittedly, they may not, but that's the first thing. And I guess the first thing we want to say about a characteristic reputation is that it's built over time through activity. And in many ways, building on your point, Michael, is, school communities haven't done particularly well at letting people know what in fact they're buying in international schools. And it's sort of an assumed identity almost. And they hope people pick it up as they go, as opposed to really managing and articulating that. And I think most of our international schools in the last 10 years have been in a growth period, an expansion period, where in many cases it hasn't been too difficult to grow the schools. So reputation management brings us back to what we're actually doing, not what we're saying. And the second part about reputation management, I think in definitional terms, Michael, is that it requires a dual focus, a focus on not only what we say, i.e. the vision and our marketing messages, but what we do. And there aren't many concepts where we're asked to look at both. There's a fair bit of focus on, what we say in schools, but can often be quite disconnected from what we actually do. Reputation really says that you're going to be judged much more on what you do and what you say. Having said that, the two should be synchronized and should be tight. And if they're not tight, then we're not credible. And I think in this era, the scrutiny that parents are going to look at with our schools is really going to pressure us to be very careful about what we say, and equally carefully look at what we do in terms of alignment. And I think those things, whilst they may be known to most of you listening to this broadcast, practicing it in a systematic and a concerted way is quite a new discipline.
Yeah. So now we kind of talk about what that definition is. Now an interesting, sort of reflection is, all right, well, how do we improve or build or manage? Like, what's the one thing school leaders across a school should be focusing on at this point, so they could start really, managing that reputation?
A great question, Michael. And, I think one of the lessons out of COVID is that schools have got to do more, but do less. And if I was going to bring us back to one concept or one area for focus in schools, it would probably be the V word, vision. And most schools, of course, travel with a vision and a mission and a core set of values. But in my work over the years with schools around the world, I would say it's a systemic weakness in terms of the distinctiveness of those visions and the articulation of those visions, and even the sharing and understanding amongst staff and the community about their role in that and what it really means. So I would bring at this time people back to vision. And I'm not suggesting that you throw out the vision, but I would be reflecting on its worth and its relevance in this time. I'd be reflecting on its clarity. I'd be reflecting on whether it sets the scene for optimism and hope that we all need at the moment. And I'd be reflecting on whether we're traveling in the right direction and whether we need to renew that vision and update it. COVID brings challenges, but it brings opportunity windows also. And I think if schools go back and look at self-definition, which is really what vision is, as expressed and supported by their values, I think everything reverberates from that. And schools that I work with, most things you can trace back to a woolly or ambiguous or a fairly weak vision and I guess adherence to that vision. So that's where I'd be saying is really the key for school leaders to go back to. And for marketers, for example, and it's also a very important concept because they need to really understand that vision to articulate it accurately into marketing messaging. So vision for me would be my starting basis. And I think the whole area of core statements, Michael, has got to be more than a prosaic activity for schools. And so, well, we've got one, but is it really something that's going to be a reputational asset in these coming times? I think is the question.
So I like the idea that you also raised about where values comes into it, because we talk about vision and often throughout a school, we can have a vision, but it's just so hard for any stakeholder to really connect themselves to it or demonstrate how they're supporting it. Like, how do you measure yourself against a vision? So, one case that I recall, it was an Acamus member school. They were dealing with conflicting rumors and government information in the early days of lockdown. And it was driving the parent chats crazy. And at one point, the school leaders had to get a hold of it and basically said, look, let's come back to what this school is about. And let's explicitly define what our values are and what they look like when you actually act out those values. What do the behaviors look like? And that particular school leader came back to me and said, all of a sudden, within a matter of weeks of basically continually asserting ourselves, asserting that message about this is our school's vision and values. This is what these values, these are how these values drive our decision making. After doing that over a period of weeks, parents began to calm down and began to channeling any sort of rumors or information that was conflicting back to the school leadership so that they could address it. And, you know, they were using their vision and values in that particular case as a decision-making tool, and allaying the fears of community members about how decisions would be made and, you know, the direction the school would take based on the information it was getting from the government or other stakeholders outside the school community. So, you know, before we kind of end this live session, is there any one sort of takeaway you'd like people to get in terms of how you can action those values? You know, what is one thing that you'd recommend for actioning values?
But I think you're right. Schools are being besieged by requests and scrutiny from parents in an online world. And so my advice to schools would be to really spell out what those values are in action and the proof points and examples across the school that should comfort parents and give a sense that, you know, it's words on paper, but it's actions in classrooms and out of classrooms and in all parts of the school culture. So whilst some principals and boards feel that parents will just see that and pick it up, I think we need to make that more overt. I think we need to make that more explicit at this time and really remind people that we have got, as you say, Michael, a filter, which is our vision and values for what we will be and what we'll do and what we won't do. And I think the alternative at this time is you're getting demands of all sorts of persuasion and schools can really be overwhelmed. So I think the key for schools is to look closely at proof points that really actualize and project what it is the school is saying through its vision and values, and really providing a sense of comfort that we are on top of this, we are on the move, and we are, as reputation would tell us, more than rhetoric. We're reality as well.
Yeah, so I think that without question is probably the most important takeaway that any leader can do from this conversation. Sit down with their peers, stakeholders across the school, and say, what are some proof points that we can begin focusing our community in on, so that we can demonstrate for them that we are, you know, living by our vision and our mission, that what they've come into our community for is what we're delivering. So, you know, how can we begin proving that? Might be an excellent place to start, especially if there's a lot of anxiety around like student attainment just because of remote learning last year, or for schools even beginning in remote learning this year. So for all of you joining us, that's been our 10-minute teaser for what Dr. Holmes will be doing with Acamus beginning September 11th. That is when our course, Reputation Management, the Role of School Leaders and Marketers in a New World, begins with Acamus. The first live session will be September 15th. It's going to be a 6-week course where Dr. Holmes will lay out the entire process for managing reputation, as well as going specifically into the proof points that you can be focusing in on to manage and build reputation. Dr. Holmes, thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to working with you over the next couple of weeks in this course.
Thank you, Michael. I look forward to people joining us in this new world, and we'll be looking at this new world concept of reputation management. Thanks for your time today.
Great.